Scaffolding is an essential support for learners, and educators rely on it heavily. This video takes a deeper look at scaffolding in order to improve its effectiveness in fostering student excellence, especially in skills associated with complex tasks. Scaffolding usually involves chunking large, complex tasks into smaller subtasks and providing the learner with support on the method or the organization required for completing the task. When used effectively, scaffolding creates a balance between the teacher's support and the learner's independence to maximize learning. When used ineffectively, scaffolding can result in learners becoming poorly supported or overly dependent on the support. Consequently, it is vital that educators be extremely skilled at designing and delivering scaffolding in their lessons. There are three basic designs for scaffolding in education. The first design involves teachers giving students detailed written or oral instructions on the method for completing a task. We will call this the cookbook design, since it's similar to learning how to cook a recipe from a written cookbook or video. This type of scaffolding works well when the task has a core methodology which the learner can manipulate after learning it from a deconstructed model. For example, once I learned to cook a basic curry from a recipe, I can customize the process through experimentation and accumulated experience. The second scaffolding design involves using templates to maintain organization as the learner goes through the task, but it leaves key details out in the process so that there's a decreased reading required by the learner, but there's also an increased independence for them. We will call this the workbook design, since most workbooks utilize this design. Many of us use these types of scaffolds when we are completing our tax returns. This design is better for inflexible tasks in which the learner is not going to really have the ability to modify the method in the future. The method to the task is fixed, and so the focus is less on deconstructing a model, but on facilitating memorization of a required methodology. It should be noted that this design by its very nature should be used judiciously, since most tasks in life do not have inflexible methodologies. Finally, the third method of scaffolding involves Socratic questioning in order to guide the learner into completing the task by helping them engage their prior knowledge, creative thinking, and problem-solving skills. We will call this the coaching design. It is the most difficult design for educators to master and execute because the questions that have to be asked cannot be fully predetermined. Questions need to be generated on the fly based on the learner's responses to choices in the process. Educators have to become adept at questioning the learner into a position where the students engage their metacognition skills. The right questions vary with the learners, the task, and even the circumstances under which the task is being conducted. To make matters even more complicated, in addition to the three scaffolding designs, there are three delivery models that should be considered when scaffolding. First is to front-load the delivery. This means that the scaffold is revealed with the task and then the learner is left to tackle the task independently. This means that the learner maintains full independence in the execution of the task. The second is to reveal the scaffolding at the start of each subtask. This means that the teacher keeps some control on the rate of the execution of the overall task, but leaves the learner independent during each subtask. Finally, the scaffolding can be delivered in sync with the execution of the task. This allows the teacher to decide if scaffolding is required and how much while they are observing the learner execute the task. This ensures that the learner is only supported when they need it, but it requires the teachers to be able to completely observe the execution of the task. So if there are multiple designs for scaffolding and multiple delivery methods, how do we know which one is best? Generally, simpler tasks require fewer designs and fewer deliveries and should maximize learner independence. This usually means that simpler tasks should rely on short Socratic questioning sessions that are front-loaded. Complex tasks require multiple designs and multiple delivery methods and should maximize skill acquisition through experience. Weaving together all three designs and delivery methods obviously takes practice. However, the following sample task illustrates how this could be done. The complex task that will be used for this sample is one of my grade 11's inquiry tasks from their biodiversity unit. In past years, my students have participated in the EcoSparks Changing Currents program, in which they assess the benthic biodiversity of a local river in order to infer if the water quality was impaired or not. Due to COVID, we could not do this study. So instead, we accessed the database in which EcoSparks records the data from all participating school studies. The database covers the Greater Toronto Area and spans several years. Using this database, we ran an alternative data mining investigation into Toronto's biodiversity. Students were asked to choose 2 areas of the region that they thought would differ in biodiversity and to justify this prediction so that it formed a testable hypothesis. They then accessed the data for 3 locations in each of their 2 regions and calculated the average Simpson's biodiversity index for each region in order to evaluate their hypothesis. Based on their analysis, they were required to create a lab report. This entire task was challenging for students in many respects. It was their first time they were expected to navigate a fairly complex database and selectively lift data from it. Their analysis required that they program a spreadsheet in order to complete a relatively lengthy multi-step calculation. They were expected to program their analysis graphically using the spreadsheet program. And finally, it was the first time in their lab report that they were required to produce a full paragraph-style discussion. That's a lot of challenges to be putting on a student in a single task. So how did we scaffold students for this? First, we used some front-loaded support. They were given the general instructions for the overall process in writing and orally. They also received an evaluation form with a point form set of look-fors. Finally, they received a template for guiding the report layout, since that's an inflexible thing in science, that helped them to visualize what the end product would generally look like. After that, we ran a mock design for an inquiry for me, where using Socratic questioning, I supported the students in helping me design a fake inquiry to illustrate the process. The image above illustrates us using Google satellite maps to explore the GTA to decide if we thought an area of the city would have a good or poor biodiversity based on satellite data. Once the students and I generated a fake hypothesis for me, they were told to go off and develop their own hypothesis and collect the required data before our next training session. On our second training session, I modeled how to program a spreadsheet to calculate the biodiversity index for 3 sites in Mississauga. Students were told to complete their calculations for next class. Then in that class, I modeled how to graph my values and modeled in point form the sort of information that would be expected in a caption for a graph or a table. Students were then told to go off and draft their results for the final training session. In the last training session, we pretended that my fake inquiry was completed and stripped the checklist off the evaluation form for the discussion. I used the Socratic method of questioning to collaboratively point form with my students what type of information my report should have in the discussion, using the look-fors as a guide. They were then told to complete and submit their lab report. The lab reports from my students were absolutely wonderful. The time invested in class and at home by my students resulted in major gains in their inquiry skills. But doing this required a multitude of scaffold supports delivered in a variety of styles and at various times. But hopefully, this sample shows how this approach of scaffolding can be done. Future lab reports and inquiries will not require this level of support for them. I hope watching this example was useful to you. And if you're a biology teacher, the links to my files associated with this task are in the video description below. Feel free to download them. At this point, I would like to pause and give a really heartfelt thank you to the EcoSpark biologists who have supported students over the years. We are extremely grateful to you. If you are an educator and this subject matter interests you, please consider subscribing to this channel. I will do my best to make videos on educational topics at a reasonable pace. Please remember that I am a full-time teacher, so don't expect frequent or high-quality videos. My sincere hopes is that my videos are useful to others and help me to consolidate and reflect on my practice. And finally, if you are a classroom teacher, good luck to you on your journey. We are all in this together.